workshop on Abstract Writing 101. My name is Lolita Moss. I'm an assistant professor here in the School of Public Health at Tulane. And I really want to shout out Hope and Juliet for their help as we just pushed through to make sure that we could present this to you today. So thank you all so much for being here. Okay, so just a few objectives of our workshop today. So I want to make sure that everyone understands the purpose of the abstract. We're going to talk about the basic elements of an abstract, what should actually be in there. We will identify some strategies for writing a really strong abstract, which you always want to do. And then I will also make sure to highlight some pitfalls that you want to avoid. Okay, so let's get into the abstract basics. And then also, I want to make sure y'all are recording if you would like to be, and we are recording. Perfect. Okay. Also, as you could probably guess, this was a template. It has a lot of really beautiful green things in it. I didn't change the images. Just bask in it. Who doesn't love nature? Okay, so first of all, what is an abstract? So according to the APA, an abstract is a brief, comprehensive summary of the contents of an article. I could not have said it better myself, but most of you all probably know that. It just sort of gives you kind of a snapshot view of a project or a paper. And it always includes those 5 W's of journalism: the who, what, when, where, why, and then, of course, the how, which kind of goes into the what. But it just kind of gives you all of that basic info that you need to understand how the project or the study was carried out. It just gives you all of that information to understand, what was happening. The formatting does vary, and particularly length can really vary. Some have abstracts in terms of journals and conferences. You'll see 100 words, 150 words, all the way up to 450. I've even seen 500, just depending on the outlet. So again, that stuff varies, and it's always important to kind of, check the guidelines for submission. Okay, so why do abstracts actually matter? Well, they matter because they help you decide whether or not you want to read a paper. The abstract allows you to elaborate upon each major aspect of a paper, and they kind of help you sort of figure out, is this something that is germane to what I need? Is it going to help me finish the paper I'm writing? Is it going to help me as a citation for a grant that I'm working on, etc. And it's also important to remember that this is the first thing that journal reviewers and conference reviewers will actually read. So it's not a small thing when they are figuring out what is the paper or the project that they want to be, officially listed as one of the presentations for a conference. When they're figuring out, will I actually show this to a reviewer? They are literally going off of title and abstract. So again, it is that entry point. And I do think it's important too, for those of you who may be students or trainees, to understand that abstract writing is a key building block of scholarly writing, right? Abstract writing is going to really help you build that ability to summarize and synthesize information, to also understand and present kind of the central point or key takeaway of a study. And those are all really essential parts of being a scholar. It certainly gets easier over time, right? I mean, at this point, I have kind of been in academia for just about a decade, and yeah, abstract writing is no longer something I'm afraid of, but earlier, much earlier, when I was a student, it was something that I did kind of struggle with. So you will build those skills. It's definitely a learnable thing, but it is a key building block of the kind of writing that you will do as a scholar or researcher or even a practitioner. And then finally, I want to say it's just super useful for you. I cannot remember kind of the details of a lot of the projects I've worked on because I have been in this field for so long, right? So when I'm trying to jog my memory, I will go back and I will look at the abstract of a paper or a project, right? Everything doesn't get published in a peer-reviewed journal. Everything you present at a conference doesn't necessarily end up being published, but you have that abstract. So it's really nice to kind of fall back on. Okay, so, oops, sorry. There we go. Um, I also want to make sure that we understand how does this translate outside of academia? So, one of the biggest pieces of abstract writing is summarizing information. There are so many other kinds of jobs or disciplines or fields where you'll need to do that. So, some of the ones I came up with are any kind of policy analysis. I actually took a policy class when I was in graduate school. I learned how to write policy briefs. That was really fascinating. It's very difficult, but abstract writing can help you kind of polish those skills. Data visualization is a really kind of cool skill. It's not super emphasized in traditional academia, but there are a lot of other fields that put a lot of um, make clear that data needs to be presented in an aesthetically pleasing way. And data visualization definitely needs you to be able to summarize info. I know for sure, as someone who used to work in the nonprofit world, that you do a lot of case notes. So if you're in human services, summarizing information, you are definitely going to be doing that. Something else that you do with abstracts is sort of taking the key points from kind of a larger corpus of data, right? A larger body of data. And that's also something that you can use even if you are no longer in academia. Things like public relations, consulting for businesses. My brother is a consultant. I have a good friend who's a consultant. They write a lot of reports and they're given a ton of information, and when they are writing up their reports and recommendations for their clients, they are just pulling out key points, all based on those many, many pieces of data that they're using to make those recommendations. I also know for sure, again, based on my nonprofit background, that fundraising and development work is so much about telling a story. And when you are running a nonprofit, when you're running any kind of community program, something even that's based on the grassroots, that's a lot of moving parts and pieces, but it's the job of the development worker or the fundraising manager or person doing that work to be able to say, hey, look at what we did, right? Based on all of the many, many activities we have going on. You have to be able to kind of tell a cohesive story. And that is what abstract writing is for sure. And then there is a level of neutrality that you need to use in an abstract. That isn't to say that you're not using, um, words like saying that something is a strong piece of evidence or that you're not arguing on behalf of your work, but you do have to leave out sensational language, and we will talk about that more a little bit later. But that kind of um, attention to being as non-neutral, or rather as neutral as possible, that's really important for journalism. That's certainly important for things like writing legal briefs. People who do technical writing have to take a lot of information and, regardless of what the content is, they have to kind of keep that neutrality. And then any kind of instructional content too. You may have a personal opinion about what you're teaching, but at the end of the day, it needs to be presented in a neutral fashion. Okay, so now let's actually kind of jump into some of the basic elements of abstract writing. So I actually was not familiar with this template myself because I don't know if it existed when I was a grad student, but there is a new sort of template that is kind of out and about in the scholarly world called IMRAD, and I thought it was pretty cool, so I'm presenting it to you all today. So the I in IMRAD stands for introduction. And as you can imagine, that is just kind of the background, the purpose, the problem statement. Why does this matter, right? What is it about this study that makes it worthy of the person continuing to read? So that's that I. The M stands for methods, and that just gives you details on the approach. There's a good amount of detail that needs to go into the method. This isn't really something you can skimp on because methodology is a critical part of scholarly work, and it also helps people who are specialists sort of figure out if this is something that's up their alley. I know myself that I do a lot of qualitative work, and I use a very specific form of analysis called reflexive thematic analysis. And so when I'm looking for papers sometimes to help me inform my own work, it's really useful for me to know this is reflexive thematic analysis. I'm familiar with that. Let's see what I can kind of pull from this work, right? So you really can't skimp on the details, and we will talk more about that later, and we'll look at some examples. The results are the central findings, what happened. This is where you really need to kind of remain neutral. Even when you have really exciting stuff, you have to sort of remain neutral. So that's the R. And the A is actually kind of silent in IMRAD. It actually stands for and. But that D is discussion. And this is where you're actually saying, what did you contribute to the literature? If you're doing something for public health, talk about why it's important for public health. I actually think this final point can make an abstract go from good to great because it contextualizes it for the reader. Obviously, if you're in a different discipline, you want to make sure that it applies to that discipline. But when you do that work of saying, and this is why it matters for people in this field, I know for sure that, reviewers and for conferences and journals, they really like that. They're like, oh yeah, that's why this matters to the field at large, not just those who might be studying that particular topic area. Okay, so let's kind of pinpoint the different elements of an abstract based on the IMRAD template that I just shared. So I'm going to go ahead and read this paragraph out loud. And I want you all to kind of locate each element of the abstract based on the IMRAD. So despite the vast research by Americans on the Vietnam War, little is known about the perspective of South Vietnamese military, officially called the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces, RVNAF. The overall image that emerges from the literature is negative: lazy, corrupt, unpatriotic, apathetic soldiers with poor fighting spirits. This study recovers some of the South Vietnamese military perspective for an American audience through qualitative interviews with 40 RVNAF veterans now living in San Jose, Sacramento, and Seattle, home to 3 of the top 5 largest Vietnamese communities in the nation. An analysis of these interviews yields the veterans' own explanations that complicate and sometimes even challenge 3 widely held assumptions about the South Vietnamese military. 1, the RVNAF was rife with corruption at the top ranks, hurting the morale of the lower ranks. 2, racial relations between the South Vietnamese military and the Americans were tense and hostile. And 3, the RVNAF was apathetic in defending South Vietnam from communism. The stories add nuance to our understanding of who the South Vietnamese were in the Vietnam War. This study is part of a growing body of research on non-American perspectives of the war. And using a largely untapped source of Vietnamese history, oral histories of Vietnamese immigrants, this project will contribute to future research on similar topics. So I was very intentional actually about choosing something that was not health sciences or social science because I thought it was just a great example of how, generally speaking, across disciplines, abstracts really do contain the same things. And then also, I'll be frank, a lot of times humanities things can have more interesting abstracts because they're talking about history or they're talking about things that have to do sort of like with just society and human life in a way that's just different from the way we talk about things in public health or social work or psychology, right? So I just liked this one, and that's why I chose it. So yes, that is the paragraph, and it is from the, I'm sorry, what is the name of this? Does this say Our War? Yeah. Their War, thank you. Sorry, there's an icon that's blocking it. Their War, the perspective of the South Vietnamese military in their own words by Julie Pham. Alrighty. So I've sort of just taken a second to kind of, highlight the different pieces. I think this is really, really well written. And it has very clear delineation of each of the parts. I'm not going to go back through and read it all, but I hope it's kind of clear here that, she took a couple of sentences to just set up why this actually matters. There's all of this research, but we don't actually know what the fighters from this faction, or this side of the story, what their perspectives are. So that's what she's bringing in the method section. She did an excellent job of telling us how many veterans and where they're living and why where they're living matters, right? They're living in places that have the largest Vietnamese American communities, so that matters. And then she shares some really cool results, things that kind of counter the literature, right? And then in the discussion, she says clearly these stories add nuance, and she contextualizes it within the literature. She says that this adds to the growing body of literature that is actually centering non-American voices. So again, I think it's just super well written. And those are the basic elements using that MRAD template of abstract writing. Okay, so let's get into some best practices for abstract writing. So first of all, the abstract stands alone. It should tell a complete story. That means you do not leave the juiciest data, the results, the findings, and the implications out. It's not one of those things where it's like, we found some really cool stuff, but you got to read to find out. That's just not how it works. Don't leave surprises. That includes adding p-values, adding effect sizes, right? If you're doing any kind of quantitative work, or basically make sure that you are including those different coefficients and different kinds of quantitative information that signal the significance of the findings. That should not be left out. I also think that you should take advantage of the MRAD template, or really just any kind of breaking it up into components, and then just do them one by one. It makes it far less overwhelming. I know for me, when I had to write they don't tell you this when you start the dissertation. Not only do you write the dissertation, you have to write an abstract for your dissertation, which is so weird. And I remember I had written, the whole thing, multiple studies, got the intro, got the discussion. It's a huge document. I felt so overwhelmed. And then I remembered, oh yeah, just write it section by section. And it really makes it so much less nerve-wracking to approach. You definitely want to write it last. It reflects the final version of the paper or the project. I think if you are someone who maybe you're looking for a productive way to kind of procrastinate, maybe you instead of working on your paper, right, or the poster that you are writing the abstract for, like for a conference or something, maybe you're like, well, I'll work on the abstract. But the truth is that everything needs to be done, because the abstract changes as the paper or the project changes. So you will be doing more work if you write it before all the analyses are done, before you figure out your implications, because you'll have to go back and make sure that everything matches, right? So do it last. And if you want to take your abstract from good to great, you should always read examples from that particular outlet, whether that's a conference you are submitting to or a journal. Conferences typically will share the schedule, or the kind of the program from last year's or 2 years ago's meeting. They'll just have those on their website. And often they will share the abstracts of the different presentations, right, and plenaries. So those are there for you to check and read. And of course, you should do this when you are submitting to a journal. It is the best way to kind of figure out some of those formatting tweaks, right? Like, do they expect confidence intervals, right? When I'm sharing certain kinds of quantitative information, maybe they want that. I don't know. You can check that outlet's other publications. And you can do the same thing for conferences. Also, you want to make sure you're checking the formatting requirements. Is it APA style? It often is, which was really nice for me because my PhD is in psychology and social work, and we use APA. And a lot of public health journals also use APA. It's very convenient, but not every journal does, not every conference does. Some places use, I think, AMA style and that kind of thing. So you just want to make sure that you check. A few more writing strategies. Be concise. So this is actually, this is a good reminder for me. I struggle with wordiness for sure, but small changes like taking something from the passive voice to the active voice, removing unnecessary words like adverbs and things that do not substantively alter the content of the abstract can help you meet word limits. I think any students who may be, watching this, you will find, and at least in my experience, that wordiness is one of those things that you might kind of bump up against as you go further and further into your academic career. And that's just because academic writing is a very specific type of writing. They really, really like things concise over here. So be as concise as possible. And, you want to make sure that you're not saying in 20 words what you could say in 17. Yes, yes.
Can you put a paper independently, or if you want to research in a review format, how do you go about that?
These are really, really excellent questions. So thank you so much, Marissa, and thanks for flagging that, Hope. So to answer your question, you can submit a paper independently. And by that, I'm pretty sure that instead of saying on your own, you're saying outside of any kind of academic institution or research organization. You certainly can. And I think one of the interesting things though about academia is that it is very much known as an ivory tower for a reason. I was co-authoring a paper when I was a grad student with someone who had been a student, and she left academia. So she was working like in I forget what she was working in. She may have even been a teacher or something, but she was not in academia. We had the hardest time filling out the profile that we had to create when we went to submit the paper, because they require you to say the institution name, they require you to say the institution city, all of this. And we had to put like none, but then for the city and state, we put where she lived. But we said, I think in a note to the editor, this author is not affiliated with any academic institution. So yes, you are right. Or yes, you can submit a paper independently. And then in terms of a review format, if I'm not mistaken, we will look at an abstract later in the presentation, soon in the presentation. Awesome, Marissa. I appreciate the question. And so we will get to that. If we don't, though, their abstracts for reviews are pretty much the same as abstracts for anything else. The language is a little bit different. I actually did a scoping review paper. I was lucky to get one out and published, first author my last year. It was a struggle. It took a couple of years, but I was able to do that. So I've actually written one, and it did have an abstract. So yes, thank you for the questions. I appreciate them. All right. Number 6 for writing strategies: do not add new information or something that isn't covered in the actual paper or again, the presentation if we're talking about a conference. Remember, the abstract is just a reflection and a summary of the larger work. It's not a place to put a little something extra, a line, what do we say here in New Orleans? Line yap, a little bit more, a little bit extra. You don't do that with abstracts. And then finally, write and revise. I don't care who you are. Well, there are probably a couple people who may be able to do it the first time out the gate, but generally speaking, you are not going to write an abstract perfectly the first time. Expect to just write a couple of drafts. I would say if you are a student, have someone else read it. You should have some sort of research or project manager, supervisor, mentor. Even if it's just other people in the lab, you need to have people read your work. They will help you catch errors or help you tighten it up. Again, the abstract is the very first thing that the conference reviewers or the journal reviewers or editors will read. So it is a very important thing. It's not something that you can work your butt off on that particular project or paper and then kind of leave it for last, right? And then just looking in the thank you, Julia. Yes, I love it. All righty. So let's talk about some pitfalls, and then we are going to, 12:40, and then we're gonna move into some exercises. Pitfalls to avoid. Submitting the exact same abstract to different journals. Just don't do it. It almost will never work because they will have, and conferences will have different things. Some people want you to put the headings. They will say, you should have these headings, right? It might not be MRAB, but it will be, purpose, right? It'll be background purpose or something like that. It'll be, and then method, and then they'll say findings maybe instead of results. But the point is you just generally can't do it, even the word limit alone. So always make sure that you're double checking that, because that's a good way to have your stuff thrown out. I've been a reviewer for APHA, the American Public Health Association conference, for the past 2 years. And that to me was a clear indicator that the person didn't take the time out. Like, they didn't have the formatting correct. They didn't say why this is important for public health. That's something that APHA makes you put in your abstracts for the conference, etc. So it was, for me, as I'm doing my grading, because there's a rubric, it's like, yeah, the formatting is not right. They didn't put anything about public health importance, etc. So that does matter. You have to make it specific, just like a CV or a resume. Use those keywords that are widely recognized in your field. I do think now, y'all, I'm not going to go off on a tangent. We don't have the time, but here's what I'm going to say. Many of us who are in academia are creative people. Many of us were drawn to this because we have a lot of ideas. A lot of us are fixers. A lot of us see things in the world and we want to help change it for the better. That kind of creativity, it powers a lot of us. I know that's true for me. I was a double major as an undergrad. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and creative writing. Right. So we are creatives, but the issue is a lot of times students like to coin terms or that kind of thing because we see it as a way to set ourselves apart. But the truth is that those keywords are there for a reason. The abstract is the way for the journal or the conference to figure out, where does your work slot in? The keywords exist so that the journal can index your stuff correctly so more eyes get to it. And so if there is a term that is widely used in your field, health equity, built environment, vaccine uptake, these are terms that are widely used and recognized, and experts and other practitioners and folks, they see it and they say, oh, this is for me. Just like me with reflexive thematic analysis. I see that and I understand, okay, that's the method that I'm familiar with. This paper, this is probably going to be useful for me to kind of sharpen my own skill set in this particular methodology. And so I want you to make sure that you are taking advantage of the shared language jargon, if you will. Make sure that you're using those keywords. And then finally, actually not finally, I have one more point after this. Don't waste time defining terms, generally speaking, unless the term is completely unknown or not used. I was in a strange spot as a PhD student. I was in a social work and psychology PhD. I did work on media literacy, which is actually a communications field, but I was also doing work that was psych focused, and it also had social work elements because it was all about intervention against intimate partner violence. And so when I would submit abstracts about media literacy, I would take 3 or 4 words to really quickly define it because that journal was not a comm journal. So that is an exception. There were exceptions to every rule, but if you are submitting to a public health journal, you do not need to define health equity. You don't need to define vaccine uptake, right? You don't need to define reproductive justice. These are terms that are widely known and used. So save your space, because that's really what it's about. You want to be concise, and you just typically don't have a whole lot of space. And then I'm just checking the chat. Okay, I'm going to do this final point, and then I will come back to you, Susie. You do not want to sensationalize your results, and you don't want to speculate about potential influence. So we'll look at an example of sensationalizing results. I don't want to be dramatic. I think sensationalize is the best term to use here. So it's not necessarily like using an exclamation point, which is pretty much just not done in academic abstracts, right? But I think it's important to understand there are ways that you can use kind of PR talk in your abstract, and it doesn't help you. It's just one of those paradigm things. That's just not how scholars, at least in the health sciences and the social sciences, describe their work. That's why we don't do it. And this is the actual last point. Don't rely on AI to write your abstract. Whatever else you might think of it, LLMs like ChatGPT cannot replace human researchers. I don't really think they can replace us at all, but I'm going to stay focused and say when it comes to abstract writing, okay? Now, I'm a researcher for a living. I will find evidence, or I'll research the matter and find evidence. I did a quick little search and this paper came up. It was just published a year and a half, 2 years ago by Ali and Singh, and they did a brief report that explained that we did some quick research to see if ChatGPT could write an abstract. Here's what they found. They found that the sections, even though ChatGPT was told, don't do this or this, put it in this order, sections were still out of order. They introduced generic text that had nothing to do with the paper, right? And there were grammatical errors. So I would say, instead of wasting time asking ChatGPT to do it and then correcting its work, if you catch all those errors, use that time to write it yourself. How about that? All right, so let's get back to Susie's question really quick. Looking at IMRAD, does that mean that a conclusion does not need to be reflected? Is it kind of covered in discussion and should not be reflected at all? So I think this is just an example of terminology. IMRAD has that D for discussion. Some places will say, instead of discussion, they'll say conclusions or implications. You can certainly add a concluding sentence. It's doing the same thing. It is basically talking about the implications or where this fits in the literature. I really liked that Julie Pham example because she did both things. She said, this is adding to the body of literature that's doing this work, and it is, pushing forward work that is looking at non-Western voices. Didn't necessarily have like one strong concluding sentence versus a discussion sentence. I think that's kind of semantics. So in answer to your question, it is kind of both. It is kind of the same thing. And then you said, oh, write in full or acronyms fine. I personally think that acronyms can be okay as long as they're defined. I do a lot of work with like a lot of, for example, critical media literacy, which is what I used to focus on in grad school. When I do the quick definition and then I'd put it in parentheses CML, and then I'd keep doing CML. I think it can be fine. If the outlet or the conference says don't do it, obviously don't do it. But yes, in general, it can be totally fine. You just don't want to overdo it. Like you don't want multiple acronyms. That just gets kind of confusing for the reader. Great questions, and I appreciate them. Thank you. All right, y'all, let's keep on moving. Let's do a little practice as it is 12:48. And I do have something we're not going to get to just based on time. I apologize because we started a little bit late, but we just had some tech issues. So thank you for hanging on. I just want to make sure that we leave a few minutes for questions. And so I'm going to skip one of my slides just so I can keep that open for questions. But we do have a couple of exercises we can do. Okay, so what is missing from this abstract? Please read it. I'm going to read it out loud. And then if somebody wants to either unmute or just throw it in the chat, I would love that. This is a study on the effect of yoga on emotional regulation, self-esteem, and feelings of adolescence. Background. The present study has investigated the effect of yoga on the emotional regulation, self-esteem, and feelings of the adolescents. Methods. The participants of the study are 110 students aged 13 to 18 years and studying in the senior secondary schools of Mandi District, Himachal Pradesh, and I apologize because I don't know how to pronounce those terms probably. The sample consisted of 52 adolescents practicing yoga and 58 adolescents who have never practiced yoga. The primary data has been collected through standardized instruments. Results. The adolescents practicing yoga were noted to significantly differ from the non-yoga group on emotional regulation, self-esteem, and feeling components. Conclusion. The significant effect of yoga on emotional regulation, self-esteem, and feelings of the adolescents calls for attention of the policymakers for initiating yoga at the school levels through standardized yoga curricula and training teachers to motivate and inspire the students to learn and practice yoga at an early age. Okay, so there are, in my estimation, really two things missing. And I'll give you a hint. One of the things is right at the beginning. And I will again read the first sentence. The present study has investigated the effect of emotion of yoga. Yes, Ashley, the why. We don't have any kind of context. The very first sentence of this just says this is what the study did. We don't have anything about, although yoga has been known or has been purported to X, Y, and Z, we don't know X, Y, and Z. So we need something. This abstract does not give us why does this matter. So there's something else that I do think is missing. And now keep in mind, this is a quantitative study. And they tell us the ages of folks, they tell us how many, and then they give us some results. What potentially could be missing when we're thinking about quantitatively and that results section? The adolescents practicing yoga were noted to significantly differ from the non-yoga group on X, Y, and Z. Yes, thank you, Marissa. So you said statistics. We are missing p-values. We are missing effect sizes, potentially confidence intervals. I have no idea what they actually did. All we know is they're significantly different. Was it a, you are confident, you should be, you are killing it. We don't know. So these are really, really essential pieces of information. Now, this got published. I didn't write this. And y'all have probably noticed there's some grammatical stuff going on. This was not a study done in the American context. I don't know if the authors are non-English speakers, but there are some like weird kind of language grammatical things going on. I actually forget which journal this was, so maybe it's not even a journal that is based in the States, but I found it and I thought it was a good example of some things that are missing. All right, cool. Let's go to our second example, and then we'll finish that up, and I'm going to leave those last few minutes for questions. Background, purpose, analysis plan, right? And that's just information about methods. And I think there's one more, p-values, effect sizes. Great job, y'all. Okay. What's missing? Exploring the dark side of pet ownership, status and control based. Oh no. Well, as you can see, I did not do this correctly because the information should not be there, but that's okay because we don't have a lot of time. So I'll read through this and then we'll talk about what's missing. It is on the slide. Did I do that? No. I'm sorry, y'all, my animations. Desire for status or control may motivate some consumers to own certain types of pets. In light of the recent debates surrounding designer pets, this article examines the dark side of pet ownership through interpretive interviews with dog owners. The findings compare and contrast two types of ownership motivation: pets as companions to love versus pets as toys, status markers, and brands. This latter category forms part of the dark side of pet ownership. Owners differ in their motivation for ownership, their appreciation of the pet, the nature of human-animal interaction, breed choice, and the purchase of pet-related paraphernalia. All right, Peas, you're in the room. So, in terms of what is missing, I think this is pretty obvious. This is from 2008, so this could be a just sort of a time thing, right? Things have changed, standards have changed over time. This is quite old, but I did notice right away. We have no idea how many pet owners. We don't have any demographic information. Where are these pet owners from? We don't have any analytical plan information. So they did interviews. So this is qualitative work. They said interpretive interviews, but we don't know anything about the kind of analysis that they did. I did appreciate that they talked about, in plain language, how do these owners differ? But we also don't really, and I don't know if this is on the slide, we don't have any implications, right? It just kind of shares those results, but what does this tell us? And then also back about to the sensational language thing, the use of the dark side, I think, is a little bit sensational because it is it's language that, although it's evocative of something, what makes you say the dark side, right? Telling you how to think. Exactly. Exactly. Feels by exactly. So this is the sort of this would not fly in a social science journal. Now, this is the Journal of Business Research. I don't know anything about them, y'all, but I can tell you one thing: on a Saturday night when I should be relaxing, I will probably jump into those archives and see kind of what they're publishing because what school is it? A school of business? Like, I have questions. But I was just trying to make it a little more interesting. So I threw pet ownership, into the database search, and this popped up. So I thought it was really interesting, but there are some issues. Okay, so we did have another activity, but it is 12:56, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'm going to leave these last few minutes for anything that is outstanding that y'all want to talk about. If people want to unmute and say their question, you are welcome to. But that is all the content I have for you today. Any questions? Ashley's got to go, but thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. You took notes. Oh, that is so cool. Yeah, you can absolutely put this on Insta. I'm actually honored. That's a first. That would be great. Well, if there are no more questions, you all are welcome to hop off. But okay, cool, Marissa. Thank you all so much for sticking with us. I really appreciate it. And again, shout out to my wonderful support in the form of Juliet and Hope today for helping me out. So thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day and your week.